Okay, this part I'm gonna let it ride because I literally I never went to church much. I went to Catholic church when I was like child, but I think it's good that she's opening up about this. This is a big part of her brand. Her first book, not her first book. Her first self-help book was published under a Christian banner, so it's important. Oh, thank you, LCV. Thank you so much. She posted, under the banner of a Christianity and like was inspiring Christian women and these MLMs very much. So I think it's important that she comes out and says like, I don't go to church. This is why. And she sort of does that here. So I will give her 100% props. And for LCV Maddox, I'm going to say, what is this one? This is a new one. Oh yeah. Wait, this is a new one.
I'm going to send you so much love and so much light and so much good energy today because I feel like you need it.
You need it, LCB. You need it. Also, Dave says, this is gross. This is weird. This is what Dave says.
Your kids are gorgeous and they've gotten old.
Your kids are gorgeous and they've gotten old. And just to make sure, this next one.
Is this safe for the internet?
Yes, it is. Thanks, Dave, for asking. And thank you to LCB Maddox for that super chat.
Make that look. If you're watching this on YouTube, I make oh, wow, she's doing it. I'm going to guess most of you don't care about that, but I also am positive that many of you do. Even saying this right now, my chest is like, there's a feeling in my chest and my stomach about speaking this truth because I grew up in the church. Because of Girl Wash Your Face, I have a lot of audience members and community members that feel very deeply about church. And I am not speaking to your experience or your truth. I am just sharing my own. And I am sharing my own not to change the way you feel about what you're doing, but because my instinct is there are members of this listening audience who have also found themselves in a similar place. And we're not supposed to talk about this. And it's sort of like just let everyone sort of believe what they believe about you, and then you're going to be okay. But I'm not really interested in that. I want a community of people who's open to every kind of person, because that's how I try and be. And I believe that we attract what we are. And yeah, I guess if you believe that I go to church every Sunday, I don't know why you would, because I feel like I don't fit into that description anymore. But if that is your perception, I wanted to talk to this. If you were not raised in a religious community, it might even seem weird to you that this would be something worth talking about publicly. But the way I was raised, it is a really big deal. And I will say I spoke about this in Girl Wash Your Face, but really the beginning of the end for me was years ago when two of my best girlfriends, Beans and Sammy, which if you have ever been to Rise Conference or if you've hung out.
The Rachel Hollis bingo that Rebecca called out, the two best friends, the couple, they've been named. So there you go, bingo.
Long enough, you probably know those girls because they're always part of my work and my life and my storytelling. But these two women that I went to church with fell in love with each other. And they were both on the pastoral staff at church. And that did not go over well. We thought that we were inside a church that was inclusive and accepting. And I guess it was, unless you were gay, in which case suddenly everything shifted. And that whole experience was horrible to watch from the outside. And I can't fully imagine what it felt like to Sammy and Beans on the inside. But I just had so much anger in that process. I had obviously seen different churches do really crappy things in the name of God over and over and over, which is insane because the foundation of the Christian faith is love thy neighbor as thyself. But I have seen the church do so many things. I mean, we have all seen, unless you have been living under a rock for the past ever, we have all seen different pieces and parts of the church do things, cover things up. I mean, like the Spanish Inquisition, the witch trials, the pure, like, we could go all the way back and look at times.
Okay, yeah, but that happened before 2019 when you left the church. You didn't have a problem with it then? I'm just saying, we're going like way back. Well, I don't know. It's like, see, like no one should go because look at the Spanish Inquisition. It's like, you probably knew about that before and you still went anyways.
That the church body has really hurt its fellow humans. And the reason that happens is because no matter how much intentionality that organization starts with, it is still run by humans. Humans are flawed. We are imperfect. But that's not really the foundation of most churches. Most churches are founded on the idea that like God is in us. And so the decisions and the actions and the things that we're doing are God. And that can be really dangerous. And if you have a church family that you love and amazing, embrace that. Like that is such a freaking gift. But I think that it would be naive to believe that every single church body is safe and right and good. Always, 100%.
Yeah, no shit. Again, it's like, okay, this is stuff that people have come to for years, and I'm glad that she's here. And I obviously align with her very much on like, yeah, any organization that's meant to collect money and tell you what to do is probably going to become corrupt at some point. Not saying every religious institution, but there's always potential for that. Of course, it is naive to think every church, any religious organization is pure and good, especially when there's evidence produced. But it's just sort of rich. Like, okay, once you've made your money as a Christian blogger, or at least people you allowed to call you a Christian influencer, a Christian writer, a Christian, whatever. Once that train has sailed and you've made your money on that, now you're okay with calling it out what people have said for a long, long time. Now, less risk because you're no longer making money from those people, maybe. But also, I agree with what she's saying, so I don't have too much to say about it, which shows something on me that I'm more willing to let her express herself when it's something I align with. So keep that in mind because I'm not saying that it's, fair of me to do that, but I mean, I agree. So what more can I say?
% of the time. So when I walked with my friends through this process and saw them ostracized and treated so badly by the church, I tried, we had been there for a long time and we loved our church. Like it was amazing until we saw sort of behind the curtain and I couldn't sit there anymore. I would hear the head pastor speak and he's such a talented speaker. I would sit in the congregation and hear him speak and I was like, this is all BS. Like I know what you're doing and it doesn't align with the loving God that I know. And I've said publicly that my oldest son is gay, but I knew even then, I knew when he was little, like I just have always known. And I just kept
I wondered about that part, if people were going to be upset about that, because I know that's like what people have said before things were more fluid and like there was more rules about coming out on your own time and not outing people. But I wonder how people think that are in the community about like, she's like, I've always known he was gay. It's like, oh, that's a little presumptuous, I think, because, there's many different ways to present yourself these days. I mean, there has been for years, but it's just more accepted socially. Even though a lot of people don't accept it, I think overall it's much more accepted at large. So let me know what you think, if you have any thoughts on her saying like, I've always known he was gay.
If we stayed in this church and Jackson was a teenager and we're still at this church and he's understanding what happened to his aunties, here's a story about what happened to his aunties and how the church, and he's like, what are you guys doing? Like you knowingly stayed in an environment where they do not love and accept people unless they're straight. And I just couldn't imagine, like, I couldn't sit with the hypocrisy of that. So we stopped going to that church. We started going to another one. We did like church hopping. We tried to find different things. After that, we moved out of Los Angeles to Austin. We started going to a church here. But to be honest, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit inside that space. I just found so much hypocrisy is the word I use. I just found so much wrong with it. I don't understand this church building and like a pastor making that much money and driving that car, and there are people sleeping on the streets of this city tonight. Like there's just, oh, I know this, like I'm running the risk of like pissing off so many people. I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about all churches. I'm talking about my experience. So I really started to explore, how do I have a relationship, a stronger, better relationship with my creator, with my God, that doesn't require.
Yeah. As long as the timeline, or in regards to the timeline, I'm not sure. She said that before, that it, like, she sat in the, in the church after the other two had left, her friends, and she just didn't like it anymore. But I don't know what the timeline was. One time, one day, a week, a month, a year, a couple years. I don't know. She doesn't specify, but she left eventually, and they seem to be friends still. So I guess they're not offended.
The step of church that doesn't require this sort of dogmatic, show up here on Sunday at 10 a.m., do these things, say these things. What did that look like? Oh, I struggled with it so hard, you guys, because I was raised my whole life going to church every Sunday, every Wednesday, maybe a Bible study. And I thought, like, I legitimately, no BS, thought, am I like damning my children to a life without the routine and the ritual of church? But then I would balance that with, am I also hurting them if I expose them to these things that no longer align with how big I understand God to be? That was a whole freaking thing. And it took a lot of unpacking and was definitely a point of tension in my relationship in the past, because I can't do this. I can't pretend in this way anymore.
That's sort of surprising, because it's like sounds like she was starting to doubt the church before her and Dave broke up, presumably because, in my relationship in the past, the only relationship she's been in is with Dave. But she was, even as of late, she was quoting scripture from the Bible in Charleston, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It was definitely on Rach Talk Live. She was on stage doing a whole thing with like soft music in the background, saying that, you got to walk through the valley of death or whatever. And so I think she uses it, and she says she prays. She still says she prays. And I guess the difference is she's saying she doesn't go to a traditional church, and that she just, has a different relationship. So I guess I could understand, like, you could still quote scripture, I guess, on your own. But it sounds like she might have been having these thoughts before she broke up with Dave, which was in, the spring of 2020. She was still writing in her books, or at least the first two were pretty much Christian, focused, talking about going to church. She would post her kids' outfits going to church in the beginning of her blog. And she never publicly really came out and said, I'm against this, until recently, I believe, about leaving the church and like not believing in church anymore. And again, I have nothing wrong with that. I'm on the same page, but it's interesting that she would publicly appeal to that group of people who think that she's Christian, and she would lean into that, but then privately be fighting with Dave about how much he wanted the kids in church, I'm assuming, and she didn't. Interesting.
And I think the beauty of going through that process is my faith has never been stronger. I would describe myself as very spiritual. I have a stronger faith, a more beautiful spirituality.
I was driving in the car, and she like pauses there, I would describe myself as, I'm like, spiritual. We said it at the same time then too. I'm like, of course.
I am more regularly in prayer. I am more regularly in meditation. I feel more connected to a loving God than I ever have before. But the freedom of removing church from the mix is that I've been able to unpack a lot of things that I was taught that I don't think align with what is true. There are a lot of parts of the Bible and the Christian faith, and maybe the particular religion that you practice, but there are a lot of parts of that that are deeply patriarchal, obviously, that make women less than, that make women smaller and more insignificant. And I think a huge part of a very hurtful ideology I grew up with was that the man always knew best. The man, daddy knew best. And then I went from daddy's house to my husband's house, and he knew best. And I just, so many things, I like denied my intuition. I disconnected from self. I disconnected from this relationship because there was always a conduit that sort of knew better. And
Thank you. Truly unruly. Truly Unruly chose a pear character, exaggeratedly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. This is what I have to say to you, Truly Unruly.
I'm too tall to run.
I am too tall to run. I'm 5'5". Much too tall.
Whatever.
True.
This beautiful Latina woman.
Is that you, Truly Unruly? Are you a beautiful Latina woman?
I am not someone who fails.
Me neither. Neither is Truly Unruly. Thank you. I appreciate it.
by removing that piece, my whole world opened up. And it's very controversial in the world that I come from to say this. Like I said, I believe in your right to practice whatever you love to practice in whatever way feels good to you. But in case you are someone who no longer practices in that way, and maybe you feel alone in that, you're not alone. So one of the things I no longer do is go to church. And
there's like so many podcasts and so many groups out there that are like, deconstructing from Christianity. Rachel Hollis is not the first one. But, okay, I'm going to let it slide because, again, biasly, I agree with what she's saying. So I will let her off the hook more than I would if she's talking about what she's about to talk about right now. Buckle up, everybody.
Doesn't mean that I wouldn't again. I would be lying if I say that there aren't parts of it that I miss. I miss like Christmas time at church, and I miss some of those rituals and those things that feel like just a part. There's just a comfort in them. And I'm positive that I'll be in church services in the future just because that's how life goes. You go with someone to a service, or it's a wedding, or it's a funeral, or, christening or something like that. But it is, I guess what I'm saying is I no longer seek out church as my connection to the divine. I don't need a conduit anymore. I understand that greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. Okay.